Welcome back to XRP On Moon, the channel where we break down the biggest XRP narratives, hidden signals, and game-changing developments that most people are still sleeping on. Today's topic is something that's spreading like wildfire across the crypto space, grabbing attention from retail investors all the way to institutional players. The statement itself sounds almost unbelievable, almost designed to trigger curiosity and controversy at the same time. What if simply holding XRP already puts you ahead of the curve? But what if the real wealth isn't in chasing hype coins, but in understanding what's quietly being built behind the scenes? And more importantly, what if stablecoins, yes, the very backbone of modern crypto liquidity, are about to find a new home on the XRP ecosystem? Think about that for a second. For years, stablecoins like USDT and USDC have dominated networks like Ethereum and Tron. They've been the rails for trading, the bridge between traditional finance and crypto, and the lifeblood of liquidity across exchanges. But those systems come with issues: high fees, congestion, and scalability limits. Now imagine a network designed from the ground up for speed, cost efficiency, and cross-border settlement stepping into that role. That's where XRP starts to look less like a speculative asset and more like financial infrastructure. The idea that XRP holders are already rich isn't about price, it's about positioning. In every major financial revolution, there are early participants who don't realize the magnitude of what they hold until the system matures around them. It's like owning shares in the early days of the internet before people understood what Amazon or Google would become. XRP, in this context, is not just a token, it's a bridge asset. And if stablecoins begin leveraging that bridge at scale, the implications become massive. Now let's zoom in on what's actually happening beneath the surface. Ripple, the company closely associated with XRP, has spent years building relationships with banks, payment providers, and governments. While the crypto market was distracted by meme coins and short-term pumps, Ripple was focused on compliance, infrastructure, and real-world use cases. That's a completely different game. Because when institutions move, they don't move fast, they move decisively. Stablecoins are the key piece of this puzzle. Governments and financial institutions are increasingly interested in digital currencies, but they don't want volatility. They want stability, predictability, and regulatory clarity. That's exactly what stablecoins offer, but here's the catch. They need a network that can handle global scale without breaking. They need near-instant settlement, minimal fees, and reliability. XRP Ledger already ticks those boxes. This is where things get interesting. If stablecoins start launching or migrating onto the XRP Ledger, XRP itself becomes the underlying liquidity mechanism connecting these assets across borders. That means more usage, more demand for liquidity, and potentially a massive shift in how value flows globally. It's no longer just about trading XRP, it's about XRP being used, and this is why the narrative is so powerful. When someone says, if you hold XRP, you are already rich, they're not talking about your current portfolio value. They're talking about your exposure to a system that could redefine financial rails. The question is not whether XRP will be used. The question is how much of the global financial system it will capture. Because if even a fraction of the trillions flowing through cross-border payments starts moving through XRP-powered systems, the impact could be exponential. And the average investor? They're still looking at charts, waiting for a breakout, completely unaware of the structural shift happening underneath. So the real question you need to ask yourself is this: are you holding XRP as a trade, or are you holding it as a position in the future of finance? Because those are two very different mindsets. And in the next part, we're going to dive deeper into the stablecoin angle, how they actually work on XRP, why institutions might prefer this network, and what signals are already pointing toward this transition happening sooner than most people expect. If you really want to understand why this narrative is gaining momentum, you have to look beyond the surface and start connecting the dots that most people are still ignoring. Stablecoins are not just another category in crypto. They are the backbone of liquidity, the silent engine that powers billions of dollars in daily transactions. And right now, that engine is facing serious limitations. Networks like Ethereum have struggled with high gas fees during peak demand, while others like Tron have raised concerns around centralization. Institutions are watching all of this very closely, and they are asking a simple but powerful question: where can we move value at scale instantly, cheaply, and reliably? This is exactly where the XRP Ledger starts to stand out in a way that's hard to ignore. The architecture itself was designed for payments. We're talking about transaction speeds measured in seconds, fees that are fractions of a cent, and a system that doesn't rely on energy-intensive mining. But what really makes it unique is its built-in decentralized exchange and native support for issuing assets. That means stablecoins can exist directly on the ledger without needing complex smart contracts that increase risk and cost. For institutions, That's not just convenient, it's critical. Now imagine a world where major stablecoins don't just live on Ethereum or Tron, but also operate seamlessly on the XRP ledger. Suddenly, you have a network that can facilitate instant settlement between different currencies, across borders, without the delays of traditional banking systems. A payment from Asia to Europe that used to take days could settle in seconds. And if XRP is used as the bridge asset between these stablecoins, its role becomes even more central. But here's the part that most retail investors completely miss. Adoption doesn't happen overnight with big announcements and hype-driven pumps. It happens quietly, through integrations, partnerships, and infrastructure development. While the market is distracted by price movements, the real players are building the rails. They are testing systems, ensuring compliance, and preparing for scale. And once everything is in place, the switch can happen much faster than people expect. There have already been signals pointing in this direction. Discussions around central bank digital currencies, regulatory clarity improving in multiple regions, and increasing demand for efficient cross-border payment solutions are all converging at the same time. Stablecoins are at the center of this convergence, and they need a network that can handle global demand without compromise. XRP Ledger is one of the very few systems that has been battle-tested over years and is still operating with consistent performance. Think about the implications of that. If financial institutions begin to trust this infrastructure for stablecoin issuance and settlement, XRP transitions from being a speculative digital asset to a core component of financial plumbing. And once something becomes part of financial infrastructure, its value is no longer driven purely by market sentiment. It's driven by utility and demand. This is why the idea that XRP holders are already rich starts to make more sense when you zoom out. It's not about today's price. It's about holding a piece of a system that could handle trillions in value transfer. Most people are trying to time the market, jumping in and out based on short-term trends, but the real opportunity might be in simply understanding what's being built and positioning yourself before the rest of the world catches on. And here's where it gets even more interesting. If stablecoins on the XRP ledger gain traction, it could create a network effect. More stablecoins mean more liquidity means more transactions mean greater demand for XRP as a bridge asset, and that cycle can accelerate quickly once it reaches a certain threshold. It's not a linear growth curve, it's exponential. The question now is not whether this is possible, but how close we are to seeing it unfold. Because when infrastructure meets demand at the right moment, change doesn't come gradually, it comes all at once. Now let's take this one level deeper, because this is where the conversation shifts from possibility to strategy, from theory to real-world positioning. When you start looking at how global financial systems are evolving, one thing becomes very clear. There is a massive transition underway from slow, fragmented, trust-heavy systems to fast, interoperable, technology-driven networks. And in that transition, the biggest winners are not necessarily the loudest projects, but the ones that quietly align with institutional needs. For decades, cross-border payments have been dominated by outdated systems that rely on multiple intermediaries, delayed settlements, and high fees. Every time money moves from one country to another, it passes through layers of banks, each taking a cut, each adding friction. This inefficiency isn't just inconvenient, it's extremely expensive on a global scale. We're talking about trillions of dollars moving through systems that were never designed for the digital age. Now imagine replacing that entire structure with a system where value can move instantly, directly, and with near zero cost. That's not just an upgrade, it's a complete transformation. And this is where XRP's role starts to look less like an option and more like a solution that fits perfectly into the problem institutions are trying to solve. But here's something even more important that most people overlook. Governments and financial institutions don't just adopt new technology because it's faster or cheaper. They adopt it because it's compliant, secure, and integrates smoothly with their existing frameworks. This is why so many crypto projects struggle to gain real-world adoption. They're innovative, but they're not built with regulation in mind. XRP, on the other hand, has spent years navigating this exact space, positioning itself not as a disruptor that fights the system, but as a bridge that works with it. This distinction is critical, because as stablecoins and digital currencies continue to gain traction, regulators are stepping in to define the rules of the game. And once those rules are clear, institutions will move quickly, but only toward solutions that are already aligned with compliance standards. That's when all the groundwork that's been laid over the years starts to pay off. Now bring stablecoins back into this picture. If governments and institutions begin issuing or supporting stablecoins on networks that meet their requirements, those networks instantly gain credibility and scale. And if XRP Ledger becomes one of those networks, it doesn't just participate in the system, it becomes part of its foundation. Every transaction, every transfer, every cross-border settlement that flows through this system adds to its utility, and utility is what ultimately drives long-term value. Not hype, not speculation, but consistent, real-world usage. This is the shift that separates assets that fade away from those that become integral to the financial system. When something is used daily by institutions to move value, its importance compounds over time. Now think about how early we might still be in this process. The average investor is still focused on price predictions, waiting for XRP to moon overnight. But the reality is that the biggest moves often happen after the infrastructure is fully in place, after adoption reaches a tipping point. By the time it becomes obvious to everyone, the opportunity to position early is already gone. This is why the narrative around XRP holders being already rich starts to take on a different meaning. It's about understanding that wealth isn't always immediate. It's often the result of being early to something that scales globally. It's about recognizing that holding an asset tied to financial infrastructure is fundamentally different from holding something driven purely by speculation. And here's the key insight that ties everything together. If stablecoins, central bank digital currencies, and institutional payment systems all begin interacting within the same ecosystem, the network that connects them becomes incredibly powerful. XRP's design as a bridge asset puts it right in the middle of that ecosystem. It's not competing with stablecoins, it's enabling them to move across borders efficiently. So the real question is no longer will XRP be used, but rather how much of the global financial flow will pass through it. Because if even a small percentage of global transactions start using XRP as a bridge, the scale of that demand is something most people can't even fully grasp yet. Now here's where things get even more intense, because to truly understand what's happening around XRP, you have to step into the psychology of the market itself. This isn't just about technology, partnerships, or even stablecoins anymore. This is about perception, belief, and the way money flows based on what people think is valuable. And the truth is, the biggest opportunities in any market almost always feel uncertain, controversial, or even uncomfortable right before they become obvious. Look at the current sentiment around XRP. Despite years of development, real-world use cases, and continuous progress, a large portion of the market still treats it with skepticism. Some investors doubt its future, others are frustrated by its price performance, and many have simply moved on to newer, trendier projects. But this exact situation has played out countless times in financial history. Assets that go on to become foundational are often ignored or misunderstood in their early stages. This is where the concept of smart money versus retail money becomes important. Retail investors typically chase momentum. They enter when something is already trending, when headlines are loud, and when prices are moving fast. Smart money, on the other hand, positions early, when sentiment is low, when uncertainty is high, and when the narrative hasn't fully formed yet. It's not about guessing, it's about recognizing patterns. And if you look closely, XRP fits that pattern in a very interesting way. While much of the market has been distracted by hype cycles, XRP has been quietly building in the background, legal clarity has improved, institutional conversations have continued, and infrastructure around the XRP ledger has matured. These are not the kinds of developments that create instant excitement, but they are the kind that lay the foundation for long-term growth. Now combine that with the stablecoin narrative we've been discussing. Stablecoins are not speculative assets. They are tools used for real transactions, real settlements, and real financial operations. If they begin to integrate more deeply with the XRP ecosystem, that creates a layer of demand that isn't driven by hype. It's driven by necessity. And necessity is far more powerful than speculation when it comes to sustaining value over time. But here's the psychological twist that most people miss. When an asset is building real utility, it often doesn't move the way people expect it to in the short term. It can feel slow, even frustrating. This creates doubt. Investors start questioning their decisions, comparing XRP to faster-moving assets, wondering if they made the wrong choice. And this is exactly where many people exit, right before the narrative shifts, because once the market starts to recognize real utility, the shift in perception can happen very quickly. Suddenly, the same asset that was ignored becomes undervalued. The same features that were overlooked become game-changing, and the same investors who once doubted it start rushing back in, creating a wave of demand that pushes the price higher. This is why timing in the market is not just about charts. It's about understanding human behavior. It's about recognizing when an asset is in the accumulation phase versus the hype phase. And right now, XRP appears to be sitting in a position where the fundamentals are strengthening, while the broader market sentiment hasn't fully caught up yet. Now think about what happens if a major catalyst enters the picture. It could be increased adoption of stablecoins on the XRP ledger, a significant institutional integration, or even broader regulatory clarity across key markets. Any one of these factors could act as a trigger that shifts perception almost overnight. And when perception changes, capital flows with it. This is the moment where the narrative, if you hold XRP, you are already rich, starts to hit differently. It's not about arrogance or hype. It's about recognizing that being early often feels like being wrong. It's about understanding that the market doesn't reward patience immediately, but when it does, it can do so in a way that feels sudden and overwhelming. We bring everything together, take a moment to step back and look at the full picture, not just isolated pieces, not just headlines, but the entire structure that's quietly forming around XRP. What started as a bold statement, if you hold XRP, you are already rich, now carries a completely different weight. It's no longer just a catchy phrase, it's a perspective rooted in positioning, infrastructure, and timing within a rapidly evolving financial system. We've talked about stablecoins and how they are becoming the foundation of digital liquidity. We've explored how the XRP ledger is uniquely built to support fast, low-cost, and scalable transactions. We've connected the dots between institutional adoption, regulatory alignment, and the growing need for efficient cross-border payment systems. And we've dived into the psychology of the market, how doubt, impatience, and short-term thinking often cause investors to miss long-term opportunities. Now, here's the key insight that ties it all together. Wealth in emerging systems is rarely created by reacting, it's created by positioning. The people who benefit the most are not the ones who arrive when everything is obvious, but the ones who recognize the direction of change before it fully materializes. And that's exactly the phase where XRP seems to be right now. If stablecoins continue expanding, and all signs suggest they will need infrastructure that can handle global scale. If institutions continue moving toward blockchain-based solutions, and again, all signals point in that direction, they will favor networks that are efficient, reliable, and compliant. And if those two trends intersect on the XRP ledger, then XRP's role as a bridge asset becomes more than just a theory. It becomes a core component of how value moves in the digital age. But here's where you need to stay grounded. Markets are unpredictable, timelines are uncertain, even the strongest narratives can take longer to play out than expected. This is why discipline matters. This is why understanding what you hold matters. Because without that clarity, it's easy to get shaken out by volatility, by negative sentiment, or by the constant noise of the market. At the same time, it's important to recognize that no opportunity comes without risk. Just because a system has strong fundamentals doesn't guarantee immediate success. Adoption takes time, integration takes time, and market recognition takes time. The key is not to blindly believe in a narrative, but to continuously evaluate it, question it, and refine your understanding as new information becomes available. So what does this mean for you? It means shifting your mindset from short-term speculation to long-term awareness. It means asking deeper questions, not just what is the price today, but what role could this asset play in the future of finance? Because when you start thinking that way, your decisions become more intentional, more strategic, and less influenced by emotion. And maybe that's the real meaning behind the statement we started with. Maybe being already rich isn't about a number on a screen. Maybe it's about having access to information, understanding a potential shift before it becomes mainstream, and having the patience to let that understanding play out over time. Before we wrap up, there's one final thing that needs to be said clearly and responsibly. This video is for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing discussed here should be taken as financial advice. The cryptocurrency market is highly volatile and involves significant risk. Always do your own research, consider your financial situation, and consult with a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Never invest more than you can afford to lose, and always approach the market with a balanced and informed perspective. If you found value in this breakdown, make sure to stay connected with XRP on Moon, because we're not just following the noise, we're tracking the signals that could define the future of finance.